Hello, continuing where we left off from our exercise. We need to implement our CRUD, our create, read, update, and delete, and our validation for our forms. Also, one of these points from here, to get the maximum score in the exam. So first of all, what I want to do is to clean house a bit. So I would really like to remove this car list that we have here, because we would want to take our data directly from the database, not from the hard-coded list. The second thing that I would like to do is to fix all the dependencies, because now if we look, we have some errors. We don't have our car list anymore, so I have some errors here. So the first thing that we'll probably need to do is to go in our car components, in here, in our car service, and we should remove this car list from here and this assignment here. So if we are on the car service part, let's improve, and let's update the methods that we have here. So obviously we have a method of get cars. So this one is gonna be HTTP get. So this will return an observable, so we can actually type it if we want again. So here we can say either object or any, doesn't matter. We can move and in our add car method, we can actually remove the entire cars property that we have here. So basically, in our add car, we're gonna keep only this HTTP post. In our delete car, we're gonna specify a car ID so that we can delete from the database. So we're gonna specify a car ID. It's gonna be a number. So in the delete car, we're gonna return actually the same as is here, but we're gonna return the HTTP the delete verb, delete, and we're gonna specify here. You can use interpolation in JavaScript. So you can specify here the car ID. You could have also written this if you wanted it to. You could have written it like this, with normal quotations and plus car ID, whatever you like. Let's remove this. So we need a quotation mark here. Okay, so it doesn't matter what, how do you want to write this, whatever is easier for you. For the edit car, we're going to specify a car here as an argument, and we are going to use HTTP put to update the car. This is going to be a put here, and here we're going to have the same as here. We're going to have a car ID slash plus a car ID. Let's write this example as interpolated string. So to write the interpolation in JavaScript, you need to use ticks like this. So it's like the immediate button under escape. So here you can say dollar and car ID. So this will translate as localhost 3000 cars and the ID of the car. So we finish this endpoint. So what I want also to have is to be able to select a car by its ID. So you have this get cars here. Also like to have get car by ID, and here we're going to specify an ID. The same, this can be all of this can be an observable, so you can tag them as observables. So we'll have a return this HTTP get. I'm actually gonna copy this. So here we're gonna have directly a car ID. So here we're gonna put as a param a car object, and here we're gonna put a number, an integer. So I think we are fine for now. Here, let's see if we need something else, but I think for now it's looking good. So I have all our methods that we need to use, and let's continue working on our car add component. So we need to make some changes there. So in our car add components .ts, so first of all, let's remove this car has been submitted stuff, and in here, let's say in our process form, we can have in this case we have a post. So this will make we add a car, new car. So we post a new car here. In this case, if we don't use this subscribe, so if we don't do any other processing part in the subscribe, you don't need to put the callback function there. It's fine. But the issue would be now that if we try to do a get cars, for example, in our cars component, I think it should fail. So see, by default we don't have any cars here. So this means that we need to go in our cars component, in our car TS component, and actually we need to replace this assignment here with this car service get cars. By default it doesn't do anything now. We need to subscribe to this observable. Think of this like a subscription to your cable provider. So there are many cable providers, but they don't do anything to you unless you subscribe to their services, right? So you need to subscribe to this service and to this particular observable to get the actual data. So we subscribe to this, and in our cars, so we return an array of cars. And in here we're going to assign this, so this cars equal cars. So what I would like to do actually here is to separate this, to extract this into a separate method called get cars. So now we have this, and let's see. We would also need to, first of all, let's see if this works. When we update this, let's see if actually we get any cards from our databases. So if we look in our console, we don't have any errors. So as you can see, we don't do a request here. Why is this? Because we haven't called a method. So we need to say this get cars. So now we get all our cars from our database. So now let's see what happens when we add a new car. So ideally, if you remember when we used the hard-coded list, when we added a new car, this would update immediately. But in this case, if you remember, we removed that cars property in the service, so we don't have that persistent data there. So for this, let's see what would happen if we type something here. So if we submit, you see that nothing happened here. You see that we only post stuff. If you check our database, you can see that the new cars have been posted here. But this means that every time when we add a new car, so in here when we process a form, we need to also update our list. So this means that we need to make probably here in the process form we need to do a get car in this method here. Unfortunately, if you see here, our get car method is in this component, so it's in the main component. It's all in all of this, but our add component is separate, so we need to make them communicate in some way. The way to do this it would be with output variable or an event called also an event. So for this we need to add here in our component, we need to have an output like this. So this basically here we define an event. So let's say what the event name would be. Let's say update, and this is going to be an event emitter. And let's say that you can put here any type of data that you want to emit with this event. So for example, if you want to emit a new car, or if you want to emit I don't know, something else. For now we're just going to check for the on update, for example, so for the event itself that it's been triggered. So let's say that we use a boolean here, event emitter, type boolean. Okay, so here now we have this update event. What we need to do now is that in this subscribe, we could have done it here, but the problem is that this call here, this add car call here, is asynchronous. This means that we can never be sure that the order, so this can happen so after the method ends. So for example, if we do let's say a subscribe here, or emit event here, sorry. If we do something like this here, we can never be sure that this will end before this, because this is asynchronous. It's outside the main, let's say it's thread. It's not real thread, but the main execution thread. So the best thing would be to do this in the callback of the subscribe. So in here, let's say when we add a car, obviously the server will return new car, or the car already created. So this is the default behavior for a REST server. So here we have a car. We will never use this this variable here. But what we are going to do here in this process form, in this subscribe, in this subscription, we're going to do this update and emit. So we're going to emit something. And in our car components here, we are going to listen for it. So if we go in our car component, so what can we do actually is that we can go in our template, so in our car component template here, and we can say here that on update, so when we do when we listen for an event, we put it in parentheses. On update, we are going to do get cars. Right. So this should be whenever we add, so whenever you add a new car here, we subscribe to this service, and then we, if this is successful, we emit that new event that the update needs to be triggered. Also, we can do here something like this. We can add a new function here. Let's say error, and we can say alert not retrieve cars. So this is in case we have an error here. And you can, or if you want, you can also log log error. Okay, so let's see if this would work now. So we should see here when we do a post, we should see immediately a GET request. So let's add a test, this one. So we should see here a new one. So you see that we did a post and immediately the application made a GET to update the list. So since now we can update you can create new cars, so we need the possibility to delete them. So obviously we can go in our database, in our server's database in here, and we can say yeah, we want to delete all of them, but it's not really very useful for our application. So we cannot expect our users obviously to remove the cars like this. They wouldn't have access to this database, and we don't want to give them access to this. So here, if we refresh this, you should see only one car. Basically, we'll need a way to display the entire car here and to have maybe some actions button like edit and delete, so that we can call the methods that we already created in the service. For this, let's go in our car template. So in our cars template, sorry. So we go here and we're gonna remove this list group here, and we're gonna use, instead of this, let's use a panel. So we will not need this. So what we would do now is to have a panel, div with class panel, and let's say panel info, or whatever class you want, like warning, danger, default, doesn't matter. So we have this div here, and we'll say inside here we'll have a panel header. I think it's heading, if I'm not mistaken. We'll see. So we can say, we can move this car brand and car model, we can move it here. And here we can have the panel body. So here we can have the body of the car. Inside here, let's make another div that we're going to pull right. And inside here, let's have two buttons. Come on. So we're going to have two buttons here. And for the first one, I'm going to say that this is edit. This is going to be delete. So let's make this class to be fairly small, so we don't want these buttons to be very, very big. You could use, if you want, with font awesome, you could have some icons here if you want. But I'll just use plain labels. So class is going to be a button, very small, I think it's success, button warning for the edit. And for this, let's have a class. It's going to be button danger. So we're going to delete this. So for this, let's say we have, for each one, we're going to have a click event. And for this, it's going to be edit car. And we're going to pass car ID that we have from here. So it's funny, I was pointing with my finger on the screen, so immediately I realized that you guys cannot see this. So yeah, we passed the car ID from here, so the item we are iterating currently. And the same we're going to do here. Click. Here we're going to have delete car and car ID. Okay. Let's also add here inside the body, let's have a small list. Let's have a li here, and let's say, for example, have the kilometers. I'm gonna have let's actually make them all on the same row so that it's smaller, compact. So you have the kilometers, and I'm gonna use interpolation and car km here. Let's add more, and let's put all the properties here so we can see all the cars, all the properties of the car. So in the year, we're gonna have car year. For here, we're gonna have engine. It's gonna be I think here we're gonna put on the same line the entire engine. So let's say engine fuel. So here you might have a problem that this fuel property might not be set, so we can use a guard to guard against a null. So we can say engine fuel like this. So if this fuel doesn't exist, it's going to be empty by default. Let's make a slash and add here car engine power. Let's put the power in horsepowers like this. And after that, let's have let's make some more space here. Car engine. I think it was consumption. If I'm not mistaken, you can look in the model, in the car model, if you want. Let's put liters per 100 kilometers, I think. That's the unit. Okay. And here let's add the price. So we're gonna have car price. And here we're gonna actually format this as a currency. So we're gonna say here we're gonna use a pipe. Let's have currency. It's gonna be, let's choose euro. And let's see how this looks. So this is gonna refresh. So now you see you have our car name and our edit delete buttons. Actually, we could make this here have a list group. This can be if you want here. List group item. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, it's better, I think. Okay, so let's see now if we add a new one. Have all of this. So this now should remove. But for now, you see, we don't have implemented this method, so we don't have the delete car implemented or edit. So we need to go in our car component TypeScript, and we need to implement these methods. So under this, we're going to say not in cars add, but in cars component. So we're going to have the edit car. I'm going to specify car ID. And for now, let's I'm going to think about this while I do the other one. Say delete car. So we're going to have car ID and number. Okay, and what we need to do for the edit car would be to call the get car by ID and populate the form, our form. And for the delete car, we need to call the delete method in the car service. And let's do this now because I think this is easier for now. So we have this car service, delete car. I'm going to pass the car ID. I'm going to subscribe to this. Actually, if you want, you can write these methods like this. If you feel more, if you want to structure and better the code. So in here inside we're going to put car. Let's we will need the same as for adding a new car. We will need to update the list of cars. So when we do this, what's wrong here? We have missing semicolon. So yeah. Okay. Let's check our delete method. So we have a bit of an error here, and maybe it's in the our get cars. Maybe we have an issue with our database. It's possible. So let's delete all of this. Save this. Let's refresh. Still have an issue. So the problem is that our database server died for some reason. So it's possibly because we have this file already open here that we are blocking the access to the server. So let's check now. If we refresh this, you should be fine. We have this. If we refresh our application, you should load the cars. So we have our car here, and let's add a new one. So I have this one, and now we delete it. Let's have okay. So what we can actually also implement here, we see we still get the data here, so it's not very nice to maybe double submit. So what we can do here when we post this, so when we create a new car, so when we use the form, we can say here process form, and then immediately in the same line we can say form reset. So this would mean that when we submit this, the form will be resetted. Okay, so now you see it's automatically resetted. Okay, so our delete method works. Now let's go and implement the edits, because right now in our car component here we have this edit car, but we don't have anything implemented here. So right now we need a way to pass the component that we want to edit. So when we click on this one, we need to pass this component, this information to this form here. And also we need to know when we actually add a new car and when we edit. So if we pass a component that has an ID, we'll know that we edit that component. When we pass a component without an ID, we'll know that we are adding a new car, right? So to do this, we will need to have first of all to define a selection. So when we select a car, so when we press here, we need to get this data into a selected car. So we need to say here selected car, that car, make a property. We can instantiate this component so we don't get any errors down the line with because we don't have any properties. And talking about this, we would probably need to add a constructor inside the cars and engine classes. So for this, we're going to need to have the constructor this selected car equals new car, or you just do this here if you want. You can say equals to this. When we do this, we'll probably need to have here, we'll need to have a constructor. So inside here we need to instantiate and say this ID equals equals either null or 0. This brand equals null. This model equals null, or you can put an empty string if you want. This year is null. This price equal null. This km equals null. So we're doing this just for having properties when we instantiate the selected car. There are ways to do this automatically with JavaScript, but for now it's enough for you to do this like this. And for example, this engine is going to be a new engine. You can do the same thing for the engine object, the engine class. So we're going to have engine, and by default we're going to have this fuel. It's going to be petrol. I need to define something here. This power is going to be null, and this consumption is going to be null. So you can set them maybe to 0 or whatever. You can see something like this if you want. The same you can do for the car. So now we have a bit of safety here. We can go back in our car component here, and when we edit this car, we have we said that we have we will need to retrieve the edited car from database. So we can either do this from the current cars that we have here. From here we can use the index if we want. So we can make a search inside this, or we can use our getCarById method that we have in our service and make a new call. Let's do the second one just for practice. So let's say this car service getCarById, car ID, and do a subscription, subscribe. Inside here, oh, forgot to put the dot before, and then the pixel. So inside the subscription, we're gonna have a method. We're gonna return a car, and here you guessed it, we're gonna assign the selected car to car equals car. Also, we can do here, we can have not in the subscription, but inside we can do error alert could not retrieve car with ID plus car ID. So you could do this if you want. The downside of this is that you're gonna wait every time for the request to finish, so you might have a slight delay. So in this case, if we do here, say console log of this selected car, we'll probably see that we have when we select something here, we're gonna have the from database. We're gonna have the selected car. You see, it comes from the network call, but it's still a network call. So if you see here, it's almost a second. I know it's 320 milliseconds, but it's still some time that we lose here. So we could go with option 2, where we can say here this selected car equals to this car's find, and inside here we're gonna do have a callback function lem type car, and this is going to return a function where rem id equals car id. So you can console log this. You can see here selected. Okay, so let's check this and see if this is faster or not. So here we pressed it, you see it's instantly, and we don't have the network call. So this has its pros and cons. You might, if the state that you have in your application mimics the state that you have in the database, it's probably better to do something like this, so you minimize your network calls. But the other way around would be to do this part like this, to make a call and get a car by ID. Both ways work. So what we need to do now is to pass this selected car. So you have the car ID 2, now have it again, this is the one selected. You need to pass this selection to this form. So to do this, we will need to use to add for the car add component. We need to have an input there. So in here we need to have our car add component here. I need to have an input. So you see how the components communicate between them with inputs. You can pass directly data downstream, and if you want to go up, you emit some event to the upper component, to the parent component. So here we're going to have an input, and for this input, let's say we call it a selected car, type car, and you can actually have another property here. Car. So the idea would be that we don't update the selected car, we update a copy of it. So here we can actually have a second safeguard, and we can say this car engine equals with new engine, and this car engine fuel equals to null. You can put this data here. We already did this before in the classes, but it is better to have some safeguards. Car engine consumption is 0, and this car engine power is going to be also 0. So when we change this, we need to update this car that we have here. So to do this, we need to implement change event, and there is an interface for this in Angular called on changes. So we need to implement on changes, and for this we need to also import it. So this is an interface. If we go here, we can see that we have an interface on changes, and this interface implements requires to be implemented in this method here. So if you can copy this one if you want, and here get this callback and on changes. We also need to implement this simple changes, or if you want you can just put any, it doesn't matter for now, but you need to import it if you want. So changes like this, and anyway it doesn't matter for now for this tutorial. So we're just here in this on changes event, we're going to say this car equals to this selected car. Okay, so now we need to pass this selected car. We need to pass it to, remember that we are now we are here, but we don't have the passing between them. So to do this, we need to do something like this. We need to pass in one-way stream. So selected, I'm gonna have from selected car So going to be equal to selected car. So this is the input inside the car add component, and this is the variable from our cars component. Okay. So now we should see that if we go in our cars add component here and in console log this, we should see the value updating. So let's check this out. So in our cars add component, you see that initially we have a new car, with the initial properties that we defined. So that's why I wanted to define them. So you see that when we initialize, we already triggered changes. So we already triggered on line 28 here. You see it's line 28 here. So when we edit here, we have selected, and again on line 28 we have on our car object inside our car add component has been changed. So now we need to map this this object to our form. So to do this, we will need to have to go for each one of this and map do a two-way binding. So if you remember from the course, you have this two-way binding. So this means that if we bind this to our car, so let's say here we say equals to car brand. Okay, and the same we're gonna do for this car model. Okay. So we don't need this engine model here anymore. We bind to year. Here we bind to price. And here we bind to KM. And here we're not gonna need this engine model group anymore. We can bind directly to car engine fuel. Okay, and let's copy all of this and bind this to power consumption. Okay, so now if we take a look in our application here, we can see that whenever we edit this one, the values on our form changes, and also our form updates. Also look at the select. Good. So now, what we need to do is that when we do this, when we add, so when we edit this car from here, if we have an ID, we need to change this button, so this action, we need to change it and to add, to modify the label. So we can actually say here in our car add component, after, doesn't matter where actually, let's say is add action, so we make a method car ID and it will return boolean. Why don't you like this? Okay, because we haven't returned anything. So we're going to do a return of is null or undefined for car ID, or we check if the car ID equals 0 because we defined somewhere, or maybe we the ID in the database, the initial one can be 0. So I think this is enough, and we can go in our form actually here in our car add component, in our submit button, and we can actually disable the button if the form is invalid but we haven't got there, or we can change the label here. So we can use interpolation again here. I do like this word. So we have is add action for car ID. Check if this is correct. We use add car. If not, we're gonna use edit car. So this is a ternary operator. So let's check our app and let's see what happens now. So by default it's add. Whenever we add one, it's edit car. When we reset, nothing happens. So we still have the edit even if we reset this. So this happened probably because we haven't add ng model for our ID. So this is still one-way binded. So what we can do is we can copy this and say car ID. So when we refresh, let's see, our car, edit car, now it's reset it. So remember when we bind to way that the values that we pass from the form and the value passed from the controller to the form are bidirectional. So for example, if we reset the ID here, in our component, so you see you have the ID, you have I don't have the value, but if we did this, we should have a value that changed here. So when we, now it's ID 3. Okay, so far so good. The next thing that we need to do, you see that we were able to add values without filling the form correctly, is to add to implement the validation. But so far we've done the edit and delete. Actually, let's check if our edit works. We haven't checked this. So in our console here, let's clear this. So if we edit this one and I say Clio Sport here, and let's see if we edit this car, so we have an error here for some reason. Let's see why. Because we have a duplicate ID, and the problem is that in our edit method, in our process form, is that we pass a car that has the same ID as one that already exists in our database. So for this we need to make a switch here. So we need to have, in case that our car has an ID, we need to to call the edit method, and in case we don't have any ID, we need to put to create a post to add a new car to the database. So in this case, we can use the method that we already created, like is add action. So if this add action, we can pass the car ID inside here. We can do something. So we post, else we edit. So in this case, we have the add car. We can just copy paste this from here, and in here we can say this car service edit car. We can pass our car, subscribe to this, and again we need to emit an event that the list has to update. Okay, let's see what are the issue here. So if this is fine, it seems okay. In case I have white space here, so I subscribe it. Yeah, so I have an issue with that. This one should end here. So our subscription is in here, so we have an extra value here. Okay, so let's check our application now. So we need to update this. This works. Add the new value. And because we used directly, we didn't do a selection from the database, and we did a find and an assignment directly with this. We did a find directly in our current list. This means that our values here automatically change. So if we make this 2015 and let's make this change the price here, this will automatically change. So now let's see if this works. And this updated also in the database. If we look on the network, have the update one, but also we have the put request where we put the new values. Now let's move on validating the form. So let's go in our cars.add component here, and one of the requirements was to be able to all of them to be required, all the fields to be required, and the max power to be 100 and the max length for the brand and model to be 50 charts. So let's maybe make something like this in length to be maybe 3 charts. It's more realistic than this. For the max and min values in the number inputs, there is an issue with Angular, and actually there is a HTML validation that will never trigger the Angular validation. But the idea is that we'll probably not implement this. So to implement this, it's very simple. To add validation, we just need to add for all our fields that we want to be required. We just need to add the required here. Required. So here again, let's do required for all of them. So everything is required. You can arrange these tags in a better way, so you see them better. You can put them with a break line after each one. So okay, we have all of them required. So the other thing that we need to do is that the maximum power, the max length for the brand, maximum length for the brand model, and for this, for car brand and car model to be defined. So let's say min length, it's 3 and max length is 15. The same for this. So what we can do here is to specify that if our form is not valid, so we're going to have disabled form invalid. So now we can see that by default we should have the button disabled, so we cannot press it. Have something here, so now the form is valid. So for the power and consumption, let's do for this, say max of 200 for power, and the consumption have max of 20 liters. Hopefully it's not a tank or something that takes more petrol than this, more fuel. Okay, so now if you look on the form, if you put here something like this, it still should be there is an issue with Angular that it only takes into account the commands that are coming from the HTML inputs like this. So you cannot put more than 200 like this, but you can type if you want. So actually you can validate this if you want by hand when you process the form. Coming back, we need to add the errors under each of this. So we need to specify for each one. The easiest way to do this is to add for each field, to add template variable. So for example, for brand, we can add a template variable called brand. We already have it. For model, you can copy from here. Let's say here this is going to be model, not with capitals, model. We're going to have year, here we're going to have price, we're going to have cam, I say cam. Down here we can have fuel. So remember that this is a template variable, so you can name it as you want, doesn't matter. For this, have power. Copy this. So you want to have consumption. So I think we are fine with this. Okay, so now we need to show the error messages. So we're going to use ngIf to display if we have any issues. Let's add some divs to make sure that this to separate this better, so on lines, line by line, because or we can actually put this inside a row if you want, but for now a clear fix is going to be enough. Okay, so under this input, let's make a div. Here we're going to say ngIf. I'm going to say that if brand is invalid. If you remember from the first course that I showed you that in the form you have all of these controls, and these controls have this specific properties like invalid, touched, pristine, dirty. So you can check in the console all of them. But for example, in here we can say that if the brand is invalid, and also combine with brand touched or brand dirty. So if we have this case, we can say here, beside we can put the others. We can text danger. Here you can put our what is required. So you can actually copy this, put under each of this, and we just replace here and say model. Say model, and let's copy again this one. As you can see, the validation is really easy to implement. Here we're gonna have year. Again, I copy this, and in here we're gonna have price. And KM. Thank God it's not a very big form. The same we can do for this. We have fuel. And here we're gonna have power. I'm gonna add a new message here, so let's say if let's say here if have the max value has to be 200. And the same we need to do for this. This is the consumption. I'm not taking this 3 times in. So okay. Now we need to also use ngIf for each of these template variables. So we go the other way around. So we say here, don't forget the star, ngIf equals, and we have consumption errors are required, and here we're gonna have same consumption with max. So we're gonna show only these cases. Let's do the same to the power. Okay, and here same for fuel, for KM, for price, for year, model, and brand. But the idea with this touched and dirty is that if we don't put like this, we're gonna have these errors by default, because by default the form is invalid. So we don't want to show the invalid validation errors by default. So we don't want to scare the users. So we have this max length and min length for the brand. So we have the min length and max length here. So actually let's add them this way. So we can do the same text here, and we can say ngIf brand errors max length. And here max length is, you can actually use dynamic values if you want to change them on the fly. So ideally you would create show error components. So for all of this you would create separate components, separate your entire application in the smallest possible components. So here we can say brand errors max length required. Okay. here chars. And actually we can do the same for min length. So this is gonna be min length, min required length. Okay, and let's copy this one here and add them to here and replace brand with model. Okay, so let's check our application now and see if we have any issues. So it should be that when you click on this, let's see. So have model, each model. So I have yeah, model. So I have a typo here. So if we type something, you see that we have a value required. If you put something like this, we have the max length is this one, but there is an issue here. Max length is required. Model errors. It's here. Okay. Let's check now. It's fine. So if you click outside, if you start typing, min length is this one. For example, for the model, if you change, let's say the min length is 5, automatically it will change the error message. So let's say here, type something, now it's 5. So actually you can tab through all of this and check if the required values work. Yep. So we are fine now, so we cannot submit. If you do like w follow, so yeah, actually it's sport. We'll need to change the min length to be 5 characters. 2010, 2019 for example, 12,000, that's a promotion. It's 2,000 kilometers and it's electric, and the power is horsepower and consumption is 0. So we still have an issue because the max length is 3 here. So Volkswagen. So now the form is valid and we can add our car in our list. So let's move on now to our final point. So I think we've already implemented everything. So we have most of the validation finished. So let's do the final point, which would be to choose between one of these. So to implement a report page or to have the brands in the database. So I think we're gonna do this too, just because we can. So maybe reactive forms, we'll do it in a separate video. So for this one, for implement report page, we need to display total value of the cars, the oldest car, the most used car, the most fuel efficient. Basically, we need to show some statistics. So going back in our application, let's close everything and let's go in our report page. Let's open the HTML and the class file. So in here, the first thing that we need to do is to have access to the car service, so to get the list of cars. So let's do first of all private car service. So this we use dependency injection to instantiate, but to pass to this component car service. The service gets instantiated when the application starts. So basically when we okay, so for now let's do this. Let's get the list of the cars, and let's see what we actually need to get. So first of all, let's define that we have a list of cars. We have cars, a car like this, and we need to import car from our models. Okay, so we need to have total equals 0. This by default, if we assign a value like a number, it will automatically be it will be typed as a number, so we don't need to type it. It's unnecessary to type it as a number here. So let's say here oldest equals oldest car. It's no. Let's have most used. Be a car. It's no. Most expensive. Maybe we require this or not? No. But anyway, let's do it. And most efficient. Maybe a car. So now let's make a method here. Let's say calculate. And also let's do in our init. Let's get the list of cars. So by now you should be familiar with this syntax. Let's say this car service get cars, subscribe. Inside I have a callback method cars car. I have this cars equals cars, and then gonna calculate this calculate. And also let's add here another in case our database fails, an error, so alert could not retrieve cars. So obviously you can log the error here. You can say console log console error, maybe error. Okay, let's remove this white space, so we're fine for now. So in this calculate, to not return anything, to just calculate the values that we have here. So what we can do is that we can iterate through all of these cars, and we can do it all at once, so we don't need to have multiple methods to calculate all of them, so we can do it for all of them at once. So we can use a for loop, either const or let car. You can define your own. You can see here let car if you want. Doesn't matter, but since this variable doesn't change, we don't reassign it. We can just use const here, car of these cars. So it's a for of loop. So we say that this total plus equal our price, and here we can add for each one. We can say if it's no or undefined. No or undefined. This we have the oldest. This oldest. So this is null. By default is null. So on the first iteration, this is going to be null. Or let's see how we define the oldest car. Gonna be car year is so the current car that we are in the first iteration is less than this oldest year. We say this oldest equals car. So we can do the same for all of these properties. For the next one we have most used, and the car needs kms. This one is more than most used kms. We're gonna have this most used, it's gonna be equals to car. The same for most expensive. You can just remove this. It's the same. Have car price more than this price, like this, and the same for most efficient. Gonna have car engine consumption. This let's go to this most efficient engine consumption. I'm gonna have most efficient. It's going to become this one. So now we have this all of these values calculated, so we need to display them in our report. So to display them in our report, we need we can display them however you want. You can do graphs, you can do panels, it doesn't matter. But I'm just going to make a table. First, I'm going to make a table, class table. And here we're gonna have how many properties do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're gonna have tr. We're gonna have td times 2, I think. Let's make this like this. So have this way. Okay. So first of all, it was let's put the total in the end. So we say total value cars is going to be total, and we're going to use currency. It's going to be in euros. Okay. And let's see what we need to have. So we have oldest, most used, expensive. So in here we're going to have oldest car and lot. Again, you can say here oldest brand. With oldest model. You can safely guard for null values, so in case you don't have anything you can guard like this, so it will not show anything. So here we can say oldest year, so we want the year for this. The same we can do for most used. Most used we want kilometers. So I have most used, and here the most used. Replace this with most used. So okay, and let's copy this. Now we're gonna have the most fuel efficient, so we're gonna have most efficient. And actually here we're gonna have we need to use consumption. So we're gonna have engine consumption. So actually here is a no, this is fine. I'm gonna say here, here, and here. We're gonna say years. From. Okay. Engine consumption. So we have most car. And let's copy this one. No, this one. What's left? Most expensive. So I'm gonna have most expensive. So I'll copy this. I have price. Actually, we can also pipe to a currency. So we can say currency, and it's gonna be euro. It's gonna be, don't care here. So now let's take a look at our application. So this rebuild, and if you go to the report, we have all those car in the lot. It's this one, most used is this one, the most efficient is this one, and so on. So with this, we finished the last one. So I have the report here. What else can I do here? So you see here we have a small delay when you get the cars, which is not actually very nice. So actually you can do a spinner here, so you can implement a spinner if you want. We can actually do in the cars component here. We can say if we don't have cars, so ng if equals cars. So if we have cars, we show this container, otherwise we show else, I'll say no cars. So you create a new template here, ng template. This is optional, it's not required in the exam sheet, but if you want to do it, I think it's nice. So you can see here no cars, and you can say the container, the row, inside the call b12 text center, have an h3. So inside here you can say loading cars. So let's check this out. See loading cars, so we have, when we go from here, we have this short loader. So this is pretty much it. What else can we do? For the next one, it was to store the brands and the models in a JSON server, so we can populate this dynamically. So for this, it's very easy. You can just go in your JSON server in your database here, and go in db.json, and let's make another property here. Let's say brands. So let's say brands, maybe an array of brands. So here we can have something like this, BMW, I don't know, Volkswagen, Skoda, Toyota. Anyway, so your brands, and you can have actually you can make this with can make different objects. So you can have for each one of this, you can have an object and you can have the models for it. So you can have something like I don't know, 320 I. Actually, it's a new array here. So you expect a comma here. Why? For some reason, yeah, it's expecting a comma. So the idea is that you can create your brands like this. And let's say instead of having it as a plain like a plain string, you can have them as an object. So you have a brand object, and you can have an ID, and here you're gonna have models. So here you're gonna have something like this, brand ID, and say I don't know 1. You know that's his BMW, and we have name 320i. So you can store this in your database. Let's close this. Check our, see if our server still works. And if we go on brands, see our brands and our models. So you could actually replace all the values in your car add component. So in your car add component here in the brands, you can models, you can replace this with a select, and you can take all the values, all the options. You can take them dynamically from the database, and that's it. So it's not really very hard to do. So with this, we finished our exam ticket. So good luck for you on the exam. See you on 18th of January, and good luck. Bye.